You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode number 47. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to be introducing today's guest to you. Her name is Randi Bean. She is the founder and CEO of Life After Law, and I'll be dropping you into that interview in just a minute. It's an amazing interview. Randi shares all sorts of information that you are going to love about legal careers, about non-traditional uses for your law degree, and about the formula for success, factors that she's seen that have made for successful law careers over the long run. Before we do that, I just wanted to highlight a couple of offerings that I have coming up for students. And this is the time of year when law students are starting out at law firms. Many of them will have summer positions at law firms or summer internships at different types of organizations. And what I'm offering are 2 trainings to help students prepare for that transition. So whether you are a student yourself, or if you know of a student who is making that transition, I would invite you to sign up for the program or to share the information with those students that you know so that they can sign up themselves. So the first training is a free offering. It is on Friday, April 22nd at noon Pacific time. And it's a training, a 1-hour training to help students make the transition from law school to law firm. And whether you are joining a law firm or an organization where you're training as a lawyer, I would encourage you to check it out because you're going to learn some skills that will help you get ready to make that transition. The other offering that I would like to highlight is a training that I'm offering on Friday, April 29th at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. This is a 3-hour course. It is going to go through 6 of the challenges that I see students facing when they make the transition from law school to law firm. And in the training, we're going to go through each of those challenges and I'm going to identify them. I'm going to offer real life examples of how they show up in practice. And I'm going to offer strategies and tools to help overcome those challenges. So links to register for each of these offerings will be available on the joyfulpractice.com website under episode number 47. You just have to go to the show notes and you will find the links there. If you can't find them, send me a note on LinkedIn and I will direct you to them. So with that, I will not keep you waiting. Let's have our conversation with Randi. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to have everybody here today, and in particular to join me for a conversation with Randi Bean. Randi Bean is the CEO and founder of Life After Law. And I had the pleasure of connecting with Randi just a few weeks ago. We connected on LinkedIn. And I was looking at her bio on her website and thinking, oh, she would be such a great guest to have on the podcast. And then we had our phone call. And within about 30 seconds of speaking with Randi, I knew that she would be an amazing guest and that I had to invite her on today. And so I did that. And Randi graciously accepted the invitation. So she's here and you will be delighted to meet her. And one of the reasons that I think that you will love hearing from her is that Randi is a lawyer who transitioned out of the practice of law and now through her organization, Life After Law, helps lawyers with non-traditional law practices. And that's a question that comes up often for me in my practice. And I just think you're going to love what Randi has to say. So Randi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
It's such a delight to have you. Now, Randi, for those of you who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Life After Law? What do we need to know about Randi Bean? Tell us. No pressure.
Okay. Well, I started Life After Law 22 years ago, actually. And it was something that came up from, having my own experience as going to law school and being a lawyer for a short time. And then I was looking to do something different with my career. And after floundering around a little bit, this ended up being the result of that. So I've been keeping very busy for the past 22 years with the company, which we've been expanding, and now we're across the country and working with all sorts of companies and law firms and talking to all sorts of candidates, lawyers who are looking to do something different. So I do that. And, in the rest of my time, I am a mom to 2 teenagers. So it's pretty busy.
It is so amazing, Randi. I have to say, it's surprising that you've been at this for 22 years. Those of you who are listening do not have the benefit of seeing Randi. We are on Zoom having a conversation. You get the recording. I'm in awe that you've been doing this for 22 years, that you've got teenagers. This is amazing. My kids are not quite at that stage yet. We've got a few years back. I think you provided me with some very helpful parental guidance last time we spoke. And I love that you have created this entity. So Life After Law, what is it and what is it that you do?
So at its core, Life After Law is a recruitment firm. So we find roles and we place lawyers into a wide range of positions. So there's been an evolution. I called it a Life After Law evolution over time. So 22 years ago, things looked a little bit different at the company than they do right now. When I first started it, really, I was focusing on lawyers making that transition outside of practice. That was what I really could relate to, because I realized after only wanting to be a lawyer and having, everything I did, my whole plan, going to law school and being a criminal lawyer and everything that I wanted to do, after a short while, I realized it wasn't for me. And so I needed something else. I needed to figure out what else to do. And I knew that there was so much more that I had to offer other than just being, quote, a lawyer and a criminal lawyer. But there was a big challenge figuring out what to do with that. And so when I started Life After Law, it was really focused on helping individuals make that transition outside of traditional practice. Over the years, what I can tell you is that it's transitioned quite a bit. So 22 years ago, outside of traditional practice, actually included things like in-house counsel roles, which now, it's a dime a dozen. It's very common. A lot of people make that transition directly out of private practice, and it's very common. It really wasn't that common over 20 years ago. There was, of course, companies that had in-house counsels, but it wasn't sort of that given of a next step. So we did a lot of that. We've worked on a ton of roles that really are non-practicing, whether they're quasi-legal, completely alternative executive roles, whatever you want to call them. We've done a lot of those. And we also actually work with law firms, and we do work on private practice roles as well. And this has been one of the most interesting transitions that Life After Law has made. We kind of always did it. We just haven't been known for doing it. And part of the reasoning behind it is we realized pretty early on, a lot of lawyers that were saying, I want to do something different, didn't necessarily need to be not practicing law. They didn't even need to be outside of a law firm environment. What we realized is that a lot of people just weren't at the right law firm environment for themselves, that they just weren't at the right fit. The firm culture wasn't something that was working for them. So over the years, we've kind of evolved to work on all of these different areas. And so we place lawyers in all of those different roles. We have clients from all top law firms across the country, as well as all sorts of private companies, as well as not-for-profits, and all sorts of different types of organizations.
Yeah, thank you so much, Randi. There's so much there that I would love to circle back to. I'm going to start with what you spoke about earlier, because this is something that really struck me when we first connected, which is your story of leaving law. Because as you describe it, and I'll let you describe it, you were one of those people. There's some people who I speak with who tell me I never really wanted to become a lawyer. It was kind of a default decision for me, but that wasn't really your story. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Absolutely. So I already knew in high school that I wanted to be a lawyer, and I wanted to be a criminal defense lawyer. So I had a goal. Everything that I was doing was I was taking law courses in high school, whatever they offered. And then I went to university knowing I'm getting my degree, my undergrad, so that I can go to law school. So I did a philosophy degree, again, with that goal in mind, going to law school. And I went to law school and already I was there. And I have to say, I didn't love it. It wasn't kind of what I thought it was going to be, but I enjoyed certain parts of it. And I went through the whole process. I got my law degree. I articled at a criminal law firm and spent every day going to court. I went to the jails. I got to talk to all of these clients. It was fun in some ways, and it was very interesting. And I have some really great stories from those days as far as the characters that I met along the way. But I also realized at that point that I didn't like doing it. And I got to a point when I didn't even want to go to court anymore. And I was really, really dreading it every day. I didn't want to practice law, I thought, or I didn't want to at least be a criminal lawyer. And so I finished articling. I got called to the bar. I worked for about a year. And I was absolutely certain that this was not what I wanted to do. And I found myself at a real crossroads because I had no idea what else there was to do. I had never wanted to do anything else. So, I did what any responsible adult would do. And I left my job and went traveling for 6 months around the world, hoping to figure some things out. I had a great time. I figured nothing out while I was away. So I don't know. It was fun. I came back and then I had to figure out what I was going to do with myself and get a job. So, I made an interesting transition almost unintentionally. I got a job working at a large manufacturing company as a contracts manager. So it was something that was using my legal background and not practicing law. So it was great because I had a job. I was sort of back again, being the responsible adult I was supposed to be and working and, using the background that I had, which was amazing. But what it really did was open my eyes to the fact that, hey, I never knew that this was a thing. I never knew that people did jobs like this. And I wasn't the only person there who was a lawyer who was doing it. So I started to realize, okay, there are jobs out there that lawyers do that don't mean, going to court every day, don't mean practicing law. So I did that for a while and I wanted to find out what else there was. It wasn't going to be my long-term career being in that role. And I think I always had a little bit of an entrepreneurial slant. So I kind of always thought I'd end up doing something on my own at one point. So I ended up leaving that. I was fortunate to be able to start working with some people in HR and recruitment. So I learned how to do that part of the business and everything just fell in place. Everything made sense all of a sudden. Because now I was learning how to recruit, I was learning about human resources, and I was learning about different things that lawyers could do. And I mean, at the end of the day, Life After Law was created from all of that. So I am the original Life After Law story because I made that transition myself. And I learned a lot of it along the way as I went. So everything was was new. Everything I did, it was kind of a first step and new and exciting.
Such a great story. I just love this, Randi. And what I love is, number one, you had this very clear idea in high school. How many of us can say that we know in high school what we want to do? You then followed through on your plan to get to where you thought you wanted to be, which was practicing criminal law. And I can only imagine how much courage it must have taken you to make that decision after a year into your practice that you're going to leave your job, travel, think about it, and then make a bold move and to then have experiences first as a contract manager, then moving more into the HR and really almost following the breadcrumbs to where you are now, right? Picking up the pieces, figuring out what's working for you, and then creating this organization that now helps lawyers who are trying to find the right position for them. So how did you get from that point where you were working in HR now and this, I guess the seed of the idea of Life After Law must have come to you somehow. How did you then start up Life After Law?
I was really fortunate in that I don't think I had a lot to lose at the time, or maybe I was just completely naive. It never occurred to me that it wouldn't work. So I just decided, okay, this is what we need. There's nothing out there helping lawyers make the sort of transition that I made. So I'm going to be that something. And I went from literally coming up with, with a company name and with figuring out what I was going to be doing and deciding, okay, these types of organizations would all make potentially good clients. And I started reaching out to potential clients and started to do a little bit of advertising here and there. I was really fortunate within my first year. I got picked up by the Globe and Mail and they did a big story. So it was a nice piece of exposure right off the bat, which was great. And luckily it went ahead and it gradually gained traction. And I think, I think it's great that it never occurred to me that it would potentially fail. So that was never an option. It was just, okay, this is harder this week, this month, but that's fine. I'm just going to keep going. And luckily that worked for me. I think that it was good that I was still fairly early on in my career. So when I say I really had very little to lose, I wasn't walking away from something else that I was hugely invested in. And I can tell you for sure, I didn't feel like I was walking away from being a lawyer or from putting the time in at law school, because it's kind of funny in a way, a little bit ironic. I mean, for somebody who decided I don't want to be a lawyer, I don't think I've ever spoken or would have ever spoken to so many lawyers, but for going this route. Like I'm completely surrounded and part of the legal community. So it's kind of worked out really nicely.
Yeah, it's so fabulous. And I love what you say about that. When we spoke a few weeks ago, you mentioned that when you started out, it wasn't as though failure was even on the radar, right? It's not something you even thought about. And what I love about that is how you've just pressed ahead, right? Like I imagine you had a number of challenges in starting a business all, on your own at the beginning. Now you've got a team, but that is such a story of, having this vision, whatever that vision was for you, and putting one foot in front of the other. So what are some of the challenges that you faced initially because as you mentioned, like this was a different legal environment, the idea of in-house being somewhat uncommon when you started out versus what it's like today. I mean, you've seen so many changes. What have some of the challenges been for you in creating Life After Law?
I think the biggest challenge, at least initially, was this concept was just so foreign to people. They couldn't, for the most part, people could not wrap their brain around the idea of a lawyer doing anything other than practicing law, being a lawyer. So I would manage to get meetings and I would talk to potential clients and I'd be pitching this idea about, a lawyer going in, let's say, as an example, a contract manager or something like that. And I would go through this whole pitch and explain all the benefits and why it's such a great person to have on your team. And you're getting, all the skills that you need with the extra added value that this person's got a law degree after, got letters after their name and all the rest of it. And it would seem like, okay, I'm making progress. We're connecting. They're understanding what I'm saying. And then the last thing that they would say is, yeah, thanks, but we don't have a legal department or we're not hiring any lawyers. And it was not like people weren't understanding it or they couldn't quite grasp it. It's like, well, why would you want to do that? Why would anyone want to do that? You've gone to school for so long and you're a lawyer. Like, why would you want to be not a lawyer? And that was the hugest hurdle. And it went on for a lot of years. I think today, I don't generally have to explain that to people. I think so many organizations now have recognized the value that somebody with legal training brings to the table. And I think it's so much more common now for lawyers to get into roles in leadership and management, in business, in so many different areas. And I think a lot of people go to law school and go through the legal training with the intention of doing something else and bringing that to the table. So I think the world at large has sort of come to accept it over time, but it took a long time to get there. This was a constant pitch and having to go back and explain over and over again. It's like, yeah, but they don't need to be practicing. And like, yeah, this person understands that they're not going to be called counsel if they're there. And they understand that. And it took a lot of perseverance, that I'll tell you.
So amazing, Randi. I mean, as you're describing this, I'm just seeing you as such a pioneer. initially out there pitching to organizations, here are these individuals who are trained as lawyers who can come and create value for you at your organization, not necessarily in the capacity as a lawyer, but in another type of capacity. And I just love that. And as you're talking about that, I think it's so interesting because here you are talking to the organizations. And I imagine there's a completely separate conversation going on with the individual lawyers who are thinking about transitioning out of their roles as traditional lawyers. And I know when I was making that transition, that I felt very pigeonholed as a lawyer. I thought, I'm trained as a lawyer. I am a lawyer. And the options that are available to me are the ones that are lawyers. And even within the legal profession, if you are, like I was, a litigator, then the idea of going from litigator to some other type of lawyer just seemed like that just wasn't an option. And so for you, I imagine you're doing double duty, right? On the one hand, you're convincing organizations that they can hire lawyers in a non-lawyer capacity, if that's what they're looking for, and also for the lawyers to be able to help them see that the qualifications that they have, the credentials they have, the skills that they've developed are not only suitable for the practice of law, but also for a number of other roles where they can contribute value. So I just think that's such a neat story.
And I have to say, at the very beginning, there was never, as much as there was a challenge getting the client side, that the hiring companies are, to be interested in getting lawyers on board. There was never any lack of lawyers who are interested in this idea. From day one, we were swamped with people wanting to talk, and it really did resonate with lawyers looking to do something else and trying to figure out, how do we do that? I did a lot of career coaching in the early days as well, talking to people about what the options were, because, even to this day, as a recruitment firm, we only really are able to provide jobs from the clients that give us jobs to fill. So we still even do career consulting for individuals because, you might have these fantastic, really highly qualified individuals out there, and there just doesn't happen to be any job on our opportunities at the moment that really suits their background or what they're looking for. So part of what we do is help them figure out how to do that on their own. So, that's still a part of our business today. But at the very beginning, it was a huge, huge part because so many people needed to know how to go through that process on their own because people weren't advertising a job for, lawyer not practicing. It wasn't really a thing. So nobody was advertising it. You had to find those yourself. You had to create those opportunities for yourself. You had to market yourself. So we did a lot of that sort of coaching.
Absolutely. And that idea of the non-traditional role, we've talked about this, but you mentioned in a discussion we had just a few moments ago that you've got resources on your website, and it includes a list of some of the non-traditional roles that are available. What kind of roles are there? What kind of resources do you refer those people to that have questions about non-traditional roles? Because I get that question too often from lawyers who are practicing, who are wondering about, nonprofit roles, or what about if I went outside of law? What if I wanted to start my own business? What if I wanted to go back to school and get a designation in HR? Like there's all these different questions that come up. So I'd love to hear what you recommend for individuals who have questions about the non-traditional career path for lawyers.
So as far as on our website, we do have a resource on the candidate section, and there's just kind of a list. There's actually two separate lists. One of them are just sort of a sampling of non-traditional career options for lawyers out there. And the other one is a list of transferable skills, which are really, really helpful for somebody who's looking to make that transition. There's so many options out there. I don't know. I can give you some examples of things just even now that we're just currently working on, which are amazing. So we're working on a role right now. It's called Sport Integrity Commissioner. It's at a nonprofit organization. And the most similar type of a role that I would compare it to is, I guess, an ombudsman type of a role. So it's really, really interesting. We're also working, the same organization is looking for a chief investigator. Again, these are things that theoretically somebody doesn't need to have a law degree or a legal background to do, but having that experience lends itself very well to these sorts of roles. So the organization partly expecting and hoping to get a lawyer in both of these sorts of roles. A lot of the non-traditional or quasi-legal roles that I think people would potentially move into could be related to a certain degree what area of practice they were in. if it was something that they enjoyed. So, somebody who is practicing labor and employment is, it's a good example for somebody who, if they enjoy doing that, but they don't want to practice, then it's sort of a fairly straightforward transition to move into something to do with either HR or labor, industrial relations, or recruitment is always a great career option, and happy to talk to anybody who's interested in doing that, because we're always looking to to grow our team. But it's a great background. It's a great way, to use the background as well without practicing, and then still staying very, very much tied in to the legal community. I think I would tell people also that the best way to find out what's out there is to talk to people. And it sounds so simple and straightforward, but the more people you talk to and ask basic question, what do you do and how did you get into that role, the better chances you'll have of finding something that you've never seen before or heard of before. And I can tell you that to this day, I always love finding that new type of role or that new practice area that didn't exist before that I never heard of. And it still happens. I still find out about areas of practice that I've never heard of before. And they're constantly developing as society is constantly developing. Years ago, you wouldn't have had lawyers working in anything to do with cryptocurrency and fintech and stuff like that. It wasn't really an area. And, now it is. So I think there's so many new practice areas. I love learning about that. And I always hear about a lot of lawyers who have made the transition. I'm always interested to hear their stories. And they also make for really interesting clients, potentially because they get it. So any lawyer that's moved outside of traditional practice into some sort of another role, at least they're a very, very good listener, and they're receptive to hearing about how a lawyer can do something a little bit different.
Totally. I love it. Randi, it sounds like what I'm noticing about you in our conversation is you seem to really be on that edge of what's next, right? You talked about how at the beginning of Life After Law, you were pitching to companies who'd never heard of this before. And even still, 22 years into it, which is again, amazing, that there continue to be new opportunities for lawyers in areas that simply didn't exist a few years ago. And so I really see you as being on that edge of what's possible and what's next for lawyers who are interested in doing something that isn't necessarily the traditional path.
And, especially now in light of the past lovely COVID 2 years, a lot of other possibilities have come up, and it's not even so much a matter of moving into a different area of practice per se. But I think another thing that is really relevant here to this conversation is another way of practice. So I think that for a lot of people, a lot of lawyers, and, I'll go so far as to say for women in particular, the lifestyle that is associated with, the traditional big law firm, for example, it's challenging to sort of get that whole balance in your life. And I think that, the pandemic has caused a lot of change due to necessity, but we've been able to now see lawyers who have been working remotely 100% of the time, granted they had to because of the pandemic, but it worked. People continued to work. And we've seen people moving to more alternative structures as far as going forward, whether it's remote part of the time and, calling it flexible or hybrid or whatever the buzzword is of the day. But that's not something that we would have probably seen even 3 years ago. It was some companies were letting it happen. Some firms had special arrangements for people working, 4 days a week instead of 5 and that sort of stuff. But it was the exception, not the rule. And I think now people are able to carve out a work style that actually works for them. And so, that could have been something that was limiting somebody's ability to practice law. Someone might love doing it and it just wasn't working with whatever they needed to do other things in their life with regards to their families, with children and so forth, or just choosing that, I want to do this, but I don't want to do it 80 hours a week. And, it's a reality of practice. You sort of go through the traditional stream at the beginning, especially you pay your dues, but you put in a lot of hours doing that. Not everybody wants that. It's another big change, I think, that we've seen recently. And, it's a lot of it's come from the pandemic, I'm sure, as people have started to really give some serious thought to their lives and what's important and what they want to spend their time doing. I think that there's so many more opportunities now for lawyers, even within practice, to make it work for them better.
Yeah. And there's so many things that you're saying that I want to pick up on. You mentioned at the beginning that some lawyers come to you thinking that what they want is to leave law, and what they realize after maybe some career counseling, some discussions, looking at what the options are, looking what else is available within the practice of law, that what they realize is that it wasn't the law, it was where they were. And so they may go from one law firm to another law firm and be really happy there. So there's that process. And then what you've described, right? This pandemic effect, whatever we want to call it, the transition from a very traditional way of working in a law firm, which is typically you show up in the office, you're physically present for a certain number of hours, and then you go home, whatever it is, versus what we do now, right? This hybrid thing, which has now shifted the way in which lawyers can practice. And so I guess where I'm going with this is we have lawyers now who are, we're looking really at how to craft for each of us the ideal role for ourselves. And it sounds like that, and I think that's part of what you're doing, right? And in terms of your recruiting, your placing, is you're really looking at the individual and trying to find a fit for them that works. And I would love to know from your perspective, what you have seen among the candidates that you've worked with. Like, what have you noticed about lawyers and their career paths? How do they find the roles that make them happy? Like, what do you observe from the position that you're in?
I think that a lot of lawyers are recognizing that they now have a little bit more, I don't know, call it power to ask for what they want and to get what they want now as part of the career. I think that it's made people realize that they can pick and choose what sort of a role that would make them happy and what would work for their lives. So I see a lot of people who, they're looking for a new job, but they'll give me their laundry list of, okay, it needs to be, I can only work this many hours a week. I can only go into the office, once every 2 weeks, and I need this much money. And they can give us these lists, and they'll find the job and they'll still be in demand. And this is one of the crazy things that's been going on lately is, there might be a little bit of a swing back with the pendulum at some point in time, because right now it's very, very much, we're calling it a candidates market. So the candidates are getting to be pretty, demanding in some cases, or just realistic and saying, okay, this is what's important to me. And they really get to choose what they want to do to make sure that they're somewhere that works for them. I mean, at the end of the day, it works out well for both sides, because we're in the business of placing lawyers at organizations and keeping them there. We want that to be a long-term relationship for them and, for us with the client and the candidate and so forth. Nobody wants someone who's just going to be in and out and have to do it all over again. So it's in the organization's best interest to have people there that are happy. And it's, everyone wants everyone to be happy. So it has to work on all sides. So I think that, the other thing that we've seen that's been going on is because of this candidates market, some of the compensation salaries have gone a little bit wonky. They've put, salary increases across the board. We've seen a lot of signing bonuses for people to join organizations. And I think also there's always been a draw for people to go south of the border, work in the States, get that US big firm experience and get the US big firm paycheck. I think the pandemic and the ability to work remotely has allowed a lot more people to do that, at least as a get started. I think people who've joined US firms, they may eventually have to actually move there, but initially they didn't have to. So you get to try it out without really uprooting your life. So a lot of people have gone that route. It's, only further strengthened how much other people here are having to pay to keep these lawyers, at the Canadian law firms and in-house and so forth. But there's been a lot of change just over the past couple of years.
It's amazing. I imagine it's hard to keep up with the changes. I'd love to know, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know, what are some of the, you mentioned the laundry list, right? That people are asking for certain things, whether it's maybe work schedules or I don't even know. I'd love to know what people are asking for that they are finding help them to enjoy their work more. And also that when those pieces are in place, we talked about that relationship, right? Where firms and lawyers benefit from happy lawyers, right? Happy employees who are enjoying their work. What are some of the things that you might ask for as a candidate?
I think that what I'm seeing is that the biggest number one ask is flexibility. I think that is so key. I think that it also means so many different things. It doesn't necessarily mean that the person wants to work remotely all the time or even half the time. It just means that they know, okay, if I have to pick up my kid this day or go to a dentist appointment, I can shift things around so I can just work at home and I don't have to do the trek into the office and back, and it will work for me. And it's just part of it, I think, is actually just knowing that that flexibility is there. My hunch is that a lot of people aren't going to even take advantage of a lot of the things that are available to them, but it's just really important that they have that flexibility and they're no longer willing to consider an opportunity that there is no flexibility. And it's a challenge that we have had with some of our clients that are, really in office culture type of an organization. A good example would be a manufacturing company. So obviously the physical manufacturing side of things, that they have to be in the plant doing the manufacturing. Often those are the type of environments where they also want the business staff to be in office. And I've had some clients tell me, listen, like right now we're remote because we don't have a choice. We're going back as soon as possible. And we're expecting that people are going to come back and it's going to be full-time in the office. And it's been a challenge. That has been the one biggest challenge I've had. And it's not that our candidates say, I don't want to go back to work in the office. A lot of them want to go back to work in the office, but they want to know that if they need to take the one day a week to not do that, that they're able to. And so clients like that are having a harder time finding people without. So I would say without a doubt, the flexibility is really the key.
It's amazing, especially when you think of it in relation to the pandemic and that this is a complete shift, right? In the way that we work. I mean, for some of us, I personally, I was working remotely before the pandemic. And so it wasn't such a big shift, but for so many, it has really just altered the expectations of what the work relationship looks like, how much time you are in an office versus not in an office. And I mean, it especially, I shouldn't just say for parents, right? It's other people also, non-parents need flexibility as well. But, I'm a parent, so I relate to that and the flexibility of what you've described, right? If I need to go home and get my kids or they're sick and I need to work from home that day, it makes such a big difference on the quality of life of the person who's now working. Randi, I'd love to ask you, because you've now seen different lawyers taking different roles, and I'd love to know what your observations are, right? After having seen this, you've got 2 decades of experience and you've seen lawyers succeed, I imagine, and others who may not have quite found that success. And I believe success really is a subjective thing. So we all measure that differently based on our own values. When you look at the lawyers that you've helped, the lawyers that you've engaged with, what would you consider are some of the characteristics that make for the lawyers who are successful versus those that maybe don't find that same level of success?
That's a great question. I think that it's funny. It comes back to the same word again. I think flexibility is really, really key. I think no matter what you're doing, as a lawyer, as an employee, being able to roll with the punches and pivot as we learned to say in the pandemic, I think makes a huge difference. I think that'll really, really help somebody in their career. I think listening is a very, very often overlooked skill. I think a lot of people are so quick to be answering and talking without really listening. And I think those that do well take in what's around them and, they really think about what they're hearing and are able to use it. I think perseverance, I think that with anything, whether it's law or in any sort of a career, it takes a while to get to the level that you want to get to. No matter how great no matter how much you like what you're doing, I think until you get to the point that, that you get to do most of the things that you love and less of the parts of the job that you don't like, I think it just takes it takes time, and you have to put in that time and persevere. I also think that really having a passion for what you're doing, loving what you do, the success will then follow for sure. Because at this point, work doesn't necessarily feel as much like work. It just feels like something that you like to do with your time. I think the people that like what they're doing, that have that passion for it, tend to be very successful.
I love that, Randi. And as you're saying, so just to recap, you talked about that ability to pivot, the ability to listen, observe what is going on around you, being persistent, not giving up, and this idea of passion. And as you were going through that list, I was thinking of you. I mean, I'm looking at you and I'm thinking you've absolutely done the things, right? You pivoted initially from your traditional legal practice to where you are now through a number of different pivots. I really get the sense that you're paying such close attention to what's going on around you, right? Like what is happening in the marketplace? Where is the opportunity? And then going out and pursuing it and not giving up, right? Being persistent in creating something that didn't exist before. Life After Law didn't exist before Randi Bean created it. And it's just so interesting. And that last piece, passion, right? It really is, okay, what is it that is going to compel you to get up in the morning and keep doing this? And I'd love to know from you in your work, what is it that you're passionate about? What is it that lights you up about Life After Law and the work you're doing?
I love being able to see that light come on, to see when, something I'm saying is resonating with someone else, to have that shared experience. I love being able to help people get that aha moment when it's like, okay, I can do this and I can do that. And, that's always amazing for me. The other thing is that, as I mentioned earlier, that we've sort of had this, evolution of Life After Law and the various types of rules that we work on here. If you ask anybody at the organization, they'll tell you, I am still tried and true, non-traditional, quasi-legal, all the way. So whenever somebody calls us up and says, hey, we're looking for, someone to fill this sort of a role, and, oh, I love the name of the company, and that totally makes sense, it just makes it all worth it.
I love it. So great. Another question for you, Randi, which is, okay, if you were to go back to have a conversation with Randi, who's graduating from law school, right? You've just finished up. You had your high school dream. You've managed to get through law school. You're about to embark on your journey. What would you say to her?
Oh, God. I would say some other things to her before law school. As far as it actually, it still applies. I think that get exposure to as much as possible. At that stage, I would say, go broad. Don't hone in on one thing only. Like, I was fortunate. I had, a legal practice that was very, very much an area that I'd say would be pigeonholed. It's harder to transition than from other areas. And so I would definitely say that just go broad and take, get exposure to areas that you might not have ever thought about. One of the things that I have, I mentioned a little bit earlier that I find out about new areas of practice, and I'm always excited to learn about new types of jobs. After talking to lawyers in various practice areas over the years, there were certain things that, the more that I started to talk to them and listen to what they were saying, I thought, well, you know what? If I was to actually go back into practice now, I think I might actually like doing that. And at one point in time, one of those practice areas was tax law. Which, if you think about, the person I started out being, or the lawyer I started out being in criminal defense, could not be more completely different than practicing in tax law. And at the time, I never in a million years would have thought, hey, that would be interesting to me. And then I started to listen. I thought, wow, that actually looks really cool. And that's really interesting. And I never would have been open to the idea when I was looking for a job, when I was in law school, when I was looking for an articling job, or even in practice, I never would have considered doing something like that. So I would say, just keep your options open, explore things that you never would have thought that you would do, and recognize that people have more than one career in their lifetime. They have more than one phase, even within a career. So it's never too late to try something different. The opportunities are always still out there. So if you reach a point where you're like, I don't love what I'm doing, maybe there's something more, explore that, because the chances are that you'll find something else that's really great out there, and you need to be open to it. But it's never too late to make that change. I talk to people all the time who had a full entire other careers before becoming lawyers. And, people who've had full careers of lawyers and then decided to go do something else. So I think that that's something to keep in mind, and realize that it's actually the norm these days. I think people tend to go through more than one career. So you should always be open to that.
Yeah, those are such great words of advice. And so much of that resonates. Randi, I think what you're saying about really exploring your options, looking around and seeing what else is out there. And you mentioned earlier talking to people, right? Like one of the best ways, I think, to know what is out there. Yes, there are job boards and it's wonderful to see a job posting, but then going beyond that and speaking to people in areas that you think might be interesting and learning about them, learning about what it is that they do and why they love what they do. Kind of like you're talking about with the tax lawyers, right? You speak with the lawyers and you realize, okay, this type of work that you're doing would actually be quite interesting. And so I think allowing yourself to consider what else is out there, where you might get that information. I love this idea of it never being too late, right? We think that we're at a certain stage that there is no room for change. I think that's important. And also this idea that we change over time, right? Who you were graduating from law school, who I was graduating from law school is quite different from, 20 years down the road. It's your values shift, your lifestyle, your life circumstances, all of it changes, and we change over time too. And I think that ability to reevaluate as we go and recalibrate as we go is part of what makes the journey so much more fun, so much more exciting, right? It's the challenges and the opportunities that kind of punctuate the trajectories of our careers. So I love that. Randi, I'm going to mention for everybody who has joined us, we will be putting links in the notes that accompany the recording of this podcast. We're going to be putting links to some of the resources that Randi has mentioned. And so you'll be able to find that. I think a lot of questions come my way about transferable skills, about what options are available for lawyers looking to do something non-traditional. And so this is wonderful. Thank you, Randi, for these resources. And for anybody out there who has listened to the podcast and is thinking they'd love to know more about life after law, they'd love to connect more with Randi, how can they find you? How can they reach you? How do they work with you? How does that all work?
There are so many ways to reach me. You can go to our website, which is www.lifeafterlaw.com. So that's sort of a great surefire way to get to me. My email is rbean@lifeafterlaw.com. By phone, I guess, depending on where you would be calling from. I'm in Toronto and I've got a Toronto number here. So it's 416-789-1444. Everywhere else in the country, we have another number. It's 1-866-227-1444. So anybody can call us from anywhere to reach any of us in any of the offices. Plus, we're also on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all those good places.
All the places. That's amazing. And so if somebody was looking to work with you, then you would chat with them. I imagine it's like working with a recruiter. They would tell you what they're looking for. They would provide you with their materials. Is that how it works?
Yeah. I normally tell people sort of the best first step is send me a message, send me a resume if you have, just so I have a reference point. And, then it makes it much more meaningful when we have a conversation. So that's usually when someone calls in. I'm happy to talk to somebody who's calling in and, have a quick chat. And then I'll say, send us your resume. I think it's important to know for everybody that anything that goes on here is confidential. So if you send a resume, it doesn't go anywhere without your express consent. I don't tell anybody that I spoken to you. I don't tell anybody. Nobody knows that you've emailed. So it's completely confidential. It's really obviously important to have people know that. But yeah, send us your materials and we can let you know when opportunities come up that look like they could be a good fit. And if you're looking for something else, if you need some career coaching, we would connect you with our career coach, and we go from there and see how we can help.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Randi. And just to recap, you're in Toronto. You mentioned earlier that your team is Canada-wide, so lawyers from across Canada can reach out to you. And thank you so much for all the information. And again, we'll link that up so that it's easy to find on the website. So Randi, thank you. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you, everybody who's tuned in today. It's been such a wonderful conversation. I know all of you have really benefited from Randi's wisdom and the stories that she has shared with us. I know I can relate to a lot of them, and I imagine a lot of our listeners can too. So thank you again, Randi. It's been such a pleasure having you on today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you inviting me, and I had a great time.
Super. Me too. Wonderful. Bye for now,
Awesome.
everybody. We'll sign off, and to be continued.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.